Hey friends, Sean here from SGT Report, and on the line is our trusted friend, historian, and one of the folks over at LaRouche PAC. It's Harley Schlanger on the line. I thought it was really important to get Harley back on the line because of all of the turmoil and I think a pretty stinking big false flag operation here with MH17 happening over there in Ukraine. Harley is on the ground in Austria as we speak. Harley, welcome back.
Thanks, Sean. Good to be with you.
You know, Harley, after our conversation at the beginning of the year in which we spoke with you and Helga Zepp-LaRouche, that interview was called Ukraine Hair Trigger for Thermonuclear War. Boy, you know, fast forward 6 months and that was not overstating the fact. NATO continues to want to only surround and strangle Putin. You've got the Western media now labeling him, as Newsweek has, public enemy number one. This downing of MH17 is being blamed squarely on him, despite the lies out of Washington and Kiev. We know that air traffic control communications were seized by Ukrainian authorities. The State Department won't release its proof, pointing only to social media, which largely has been debunked. It's Putin's missile, says Murdoch's tabloid, The Sun, along with Newsweek. There's so much demonization here, as McCain says there will be hell to pay if Putin shot this plane down and they can prove it. They're trying to prove it without providing any proof. So many things I want to cover, Harley, and a soundbite from Sergei Glaziev, the economic advisor to Putin, who really laid it out in a roundtable back in June of 2014. Where would you like to start, Harley? Because this appears to me, MH17 appears to me to be nothing more than another 9/11 false flag style operation.
Well, I think where you brought up the interview you did with Mrs. LaRouche and myself back in January, a lot of people said this is typical hyperbole. You're trying to scare people with this talk of possible thermonuclear war. And what we saw, which most people didn't see, is that there is a faction in the Western establishment, the transatlantic establishment, the London-based and Washington, Wall Street-based establishment, which is gunning for war. And there's a reason for it. Their system is collapsing. The financial system of the transatlantic is on the way down. And I see it very clearly here in Europe from meetings I've been doing, where there's no illusion that there's a recovery. But at the same time, instead of admitting that they failed and that we need another alternative, they're trying to bring the rest of the world into that failed system. And the Russians won't do it. And if you remember what Mrs. LaRouche said at that time, is that Putin rejected the offer to link up with the European Union, the transatlantic banking system, and to open Russia to so-called free trade, free market reforms. Instead, he said he's going with raw material-based physical production orientation with China, India, Brazil, and South Africa. And now, 6 months later, just last week, the BRICS countries, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, had a summit after the World Cup in Brazil where they formalized a new financial development bank, which is a counter to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which is a total threat to the collapsing system. And so you find agreement from Cameron in Britain, Obama in Washington, and idiots and warmongers like John McCain that Putin is enemy number one, and they'll make up any story to try and sell it. And as you know, the thing that you really have to ask people like Kerry and others, which the mainstream media never will do, weren't you wrong on Syria and sarin gas who used it? Weren't you wrong on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Aren't you wrong in asserting that it's a freedom and democratic movement that took over Ukraine instead of a gang of fascists working to impose such horrible austerity on the people of Ukraine that even their choice for prime minister, Yatsenyuk, resigned this week? They've been wrong, and they know it. They're liars.
Well, they are liars, and I want to jump in and say, you know, when we posted that information that Newsweek has put Putin on the cover in sunglasses and then superimposed within the sunglasses 2 nuclear explosions, making him look like he has red devil eyes and calling him public enemy number one, it's the new worst man on the planet that they want you to be afraid of. They wanted you to be afraid of Saddam Hussein. They wanted you to be afraid of Gaddafi. They wanted you to be afraid of bin Laden. And now it's Putin. And when we look at the Western media, when we look at the Mockingbird mainstream controlled media, saying these things about Putin, any thinking person in this country ought to be scared to death that it's just more lies, because they only lie to us. Now, if he's such a boogeyman, why don't we compare him to the IMF, which is only enslaving nation states like Greece? You just made mention that the plan is to enslave the people in Ukraine. Sergei Glaziev spoke specifically of that, saying that the plan is to turn Ukrainians into serfs. I'm going to play some of those sound bites in a minute. But getting back to this idea of Putin being some sort of demon, let's compare him to the IMF. Putin just wrote off $32 billion of Cuba's Russian-era debt on a recent trip to Cuba. Now, compared to what the IMF does to Greece, I think they've indebted Greece, with $16 billion?
Well, they've continuously added to the debt owed by Greece by reorganizing the debt, making new loans to Greece to keep the old debt still active, and then increasing the indebtedness. Look, the interesting thing on the Putin question, let's take a step back and look at the mess that we're in the Middle East with ISIS, with the new caliphate, and so on. Obama, at the same time he's critical of these killers, these jihadist murderers, is offering more money to the non-existent Syrian opposition, the moderate Syrian opposition, to fight against Assad. We demonized Assad for years. He's the only one fighting the people we say are the horrible terrorists were about to take over Iraq. You have to look at these things. This is why Americans are so gullible, because they look at the flavor of the moment as opposed to having a strategic perspective. The United States alliance with Saudi Arabia is the telltale sign. Obama's protection of the Saudis, the same way Bush protected them. The Saudi funds that are going into the terrorist deployments, this is the real threat to the United States, to our security, and to the world. And yet Obama is treated by the media as someone who's trying to bring about peace, when in fact everything he's doing is pushing us closer to the moment where thermonuclear war becomes inevitable. And Putin, up until recently, through his military, has been working with the U.S. Joint Chiefs to pull us back from that. And now it appears as though that protection from the Joint Chiefs may be weakening a little bit, as we see some of the more recent signs that, according to another story, I think it was in Newsweek, the General Dempsey just said the American military is preparing for a new Cold War. Well, what does that mean?
No, I agree with you, Harley, and I want to circle back to these comments made by Sergei Glaziev, the economic advisor to Putin, here recently in June in a roundtable. When we posted this at SGT Report, the comments were overwhelmingly in support of what this man was saying, because truth cuts through. It is evident, it's self-evident. And here's a comment from Sam who says, "This very serious and logical plea of exposed truth laying out the facts is, in my opinion, perhaps one of the most important clips of very serious World War IV prevention that is currently available." Others go on to support that theme. We'll translate some of this here.
Политика Киева ориентирована действительно на геноцид.
He starts by saying, Kiev is clearly conducting a policy of genocide to eliminate the whole population of Donbass. Now, Donbass, Harley, is where the heart of the resistance, the pro-Russian resistance, is. He says they're destroying hospitals, and he's referring to Kiev and the Ukrainian military. They're destroying hospitals, kindergartens, schools. The fate they're preparing for the people of Donbass is serfdom. It is obvious that the United States is fully controlling the Kiev Nazis, Poroshenko personally, and the government, and is pushing them to pursue this war against Donbass to the very end. This is a war by the United States against us. So we have to understand that the key to resolving the catastrophe of Ukraine is to be found in Washington. That's where Nazism has to be defeated. I've just taken a speech that's far longer than 5 or 6 or 7 minutes there and summarized it down to just the paragraph I shared with you guys. If you want to listen to the whole powerful speech yourself, just type in must listen, the U.S. is militarizing Ukraine. I'll show a screen grab of it here as we're speaking, Harley, so people can go listen to that entire thing. But you guys know him. I think you know him personally. Don't you know, Sergei?
Well, I don't, but Mr. LaRouche knows him very well. In fact, our organization published his book in the 1990s that attacked the post-collapse of communism the imposition of a Wall Street banking regime under Yeltsin. And he called the book genocide. He said, this is going to destroy the Russian people. Glaziev then formed a new party with a man named Rogozin, who's another top advisor now to Putin. And Glaziev continues he just sent a greetings to one of our conferences in New York City. What's key about understanding Glaziev is that the best thinkers in Russia saw the opportunity with the fall of communism to make a break with the imperial policies of the post-World War II period, especially from the Carter administration forward, in which you had globalization, free trade, the domination of the world by Federal Reserve-style international banking cartels, looting and destroying weak nations, but setting their targets on those larger nations which didn't go along. Glaziev and others saw the European Union as an effort to destroy Germany, France, and Italy as economies and loot them. And they were absolutely right. So Glaziev's association with LaRouche was around this idea of the American system of physical economy. What they wanted in Russia after the collapse of communism was not to go under a monetarist, funny money regime, a speculative casino. They wanted physical economy, high-speed rail, modernization of raw material production, nuclear fusion power. That's what they were looking for. And this is an ideal potential for the United States, except that we're under domination of this banking cartel, which is destroying our physical economy and using us as a military force against those countries which actually want to break out of this transatlantic collapse and develop. Now, what Glaziev has consistently identified is that the neocons in the State Department, like Victoria Nuland, combined with the liberal imperialists, the so-called left-wing imperialist types like Susan Rice, the liar of Benghazi, and Samantha Power, who are despicable in their attacks on Putin and anyone that doesn't agree with them, that these liberal imperialists and these neocons have the same basic view, which is you have to destroy any sovereign nation state on the planet if you're going to have a domination of this bankers cartel. And this bankers cartel is bankrupt. And so they're using military force because they can no longer win people over by offering them conditionalities, IMF loans in return for serfdom. That's what Glaziev is saying. And for Russia, this is an existential issue. Now, I would argue, Sean, that for every American who listens to this interview, this is an existential issue for us. You know, Mr. LaRouche has been on record for a long time saying that if America doesn't have the guts to impeach Obama, we're not going to survive. And if you look at what Obama has done in the war, the use of regime change, he took the Bush policy lock, stock, and barrel in terms of bailouts, in terms of destroying our border protection, in terms of the NSA spying, the drone policy. And who do we collaborate with on all of this? Britain, the GCHC. It's an imperial alliance. Look at the Middle East. Netanyahu is a part of the same network. And that's why the U.S. is preventing the United Nations or anyone else from intervening on the genocide that's being conducted against the Palestinian people.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk to you about the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, more specifically the conflict between the IDF and what is referred to as Hamas, which is apparently hiding weapons of mass destruction under hospital beds and in schools, according to the press. Okay, a lot to cover here because, you know, a lot of times, Harley, and you and I have spoken about this before, you have such candor, your heart is so open to discussing any topic, there's never anything off limits with you, and it's what I appreciate so much about you. And I believe you are of Jewish heritage yourself, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Seems to me a person perfectly qualified to talk about these issues. So often we will see the charge in comment sections across the internet, but at SGT Report as well, that it's the Jews or no, it isn't the Jews. I always like to say, look at the Zionists, look at the neocons. For instance, in Ukraine, here's a headline from Zero Hedge. company in which Joe Biden's son is director prepares to drill shale gas in East Ukraine. I don't know that Joe Biden is a Jew, but I know that he is an avowed Zionist. Harley, I don't even like to talk about this issue because it's so divisive, right? If you question Israel, you're anti-Semitic. Labels are too easily thrown around, and I just want your take on it.
Look, this is an important question in the media because you have either the argument that anytime you criticize Israel, you're saying blame the Jews.
Right.
Or if you accept Israel, they say, well, it's the Jews who are destroying the world. Look, there's some bad Jews out there. Just as there are bad Christians, bad Muslims, there are some very evil people who proclaim to be of various religions. But I think it's fair to say that they miss the point of religion. Because religion, that is the Judeo-Christian tradition, does not give the authority to anyone based on religious belief to kill or suppress others or impose injustices upon them.
That's right.
Now, secondly, look, an important point. This didn't have to happen in the Middle East. There was a proposal that was adopted at Oslo by Yitzhak Rabin, who, as far as I know, is Jewish. Rabin basically said, we have to make peace with the Palestinians. And in private discussions, according to his wife, Leah Rabin, he was saying that Israel cannot act toward the Palestinians the way the Nazis acted toward the Jews. He said, we're turning our troops into enforcers of the same kind of policy that was enforced in the Warsaw Ghetto. So this was a Jewish leader of a Jewish state who said that. And he was assassinated. And the grouping from which his assassin came from is now in power in Israel with Netanyahu. Netanyahu represents something called the Jabotinsky wing of Zionism, which believes that the Old Testament is basically a real estate contract from God, giving the Jewish people title to all the land from the Nile to the Tigris and Euphrates. Now, why is it that we would accept that kind of fundamentalism from Judaism?
Right.
When we say it's unacceptable if it comes from Islam.
Right.
Now, this is where you see people using religious arguments for other purposes. Because the reality of the situation in Israel is that you have an outpost of an empire. At the same time, you have the same religious fanaticism being used by the Saudis to launch jihads against sovereign nations such as Syria and Iraq, and also to target Iran. And so again, I think the bigger question here is the question of what is the responsibility of sovereign nations in a modern world? To defend the interests of their people, but to do it in collaboration with their neighbors, to act for the benefit of the other. That's the way the modern world came out of the religious wars among Christians in Europe in the 17th century. Haven't we learned anything? I mean, this is where you see that the highest religion of the people who backed Netanyahu and backed the Nazis in Ukraine is greed. It's the worship of mammon. It's money, 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 money. And they'll kill for that and try and justify it by religious grounds. Now, if you make the simple argument, well, does Israel have a right to defend itself from missiles being shot at it? Obviously you could say yes, but then the question is, why are people shooting missiles at it? What is Hamas trying to do? They got a tiny strip of land where they're essentially locked into a concentration camp. So, the debate in the Western media is so tailored toward accepting this clash of civilizations. And now they're attempting to paint Putin as someone who's outside the Western tradition, someone who's outside of the understanding that we all have in the West. Well, I don't think there's a simple understanding in the West. I don't share my views of what America represents with Obama. I think Obama is out to destroy this country, and that's why he should be removed.
Harley, thanks for covering that in the way that you did, because what concerns me, all right, look, I'm a Christian, you're Jewish, we like each other very, very much. I mean, I can speak for myself anyway, Harley, I love you, and I don't understand, and I think most people are starting to come to this conclusion. I don't understand why humanity can't just come together in peace. I've long said, Harley, that it's humanity versus the Bankster's at this point. And I think they're using religion purposefully to bring in World War III. I think this is all being done by design. It has to be, if you step back and look at it. The violence it's mind-boggling for anybody with empathy, for anybody who cares truly about humanity. And I know ISIS is doing terrible things, but I just don't understand, Harley. I'm disappointed in humanity that this is where we sit in 2014. Instead of striving to be a Type 1 civilization and go off-planet and harness the power of the solar system, which clearly we should be able to do at this point, given an Apple iPhone in your pocket. Look where we were 100 years ago. We couldn't get an airplane in the sky. I mean, can't we move forward? Can't we move forward in peace and harmony? And what's it going to take for that to happen?
Well, Sean, I had an interesting experience the other day. I was walking the streets of Vienna, Austria, which was 100 years ago, the scene of a mobilization that led to World War I. And we often ask ourselves, didn't they see it coming? You know, you had the assassination of the Archduke at the end of June 1914. For the next month, the various empires mobilized their troops. And everyone knew a war was coming, but they all had the illusion that it would be quick, it would be glorious, and then you could go back on to living life as usual. And there was a high level of indulgence in the population, you know, who didn't know what war meant. And World War I was a horrific war. But I was looking at the people the other day, between the iPhones, the overindulgence in pastry, ice cream, the obliviousness to the fact that not that far away, you had a war going on in Ukraine and wars going on in the Middle East. Now, one of the things on Ukraine is that what caused the war there? There was a decision made by a democratically elected government not to accept the conditions of membership in the European Union and instead take a loan from Russia. That's what happened when Yanukovych rejected the EU. Now, shortly after that, you had armed gangs showing up on Maidan Square, shooting policemen, shooting demonstrators, threatening supporters of Yanukovych, driving him out with the full support of NATO and the United States, and threatening people who spoke Russian, which is about a fourth of the population of Ukraine, but a 60% or so proportion of the people who live in eastern Ukraine. And what the Russians said is, we're not going to allow you to take away the rights of those people. And Putin did what was legally his right to do in Crimea, and they had a vote. And all of a sudden, this makes him the world's largest criminal. What was at stake? And I'm getting back to your point about the Bankster's. It's that Ukraine was a testing point of whether or not the EU, the European Union, could continue its mobilization eastward, backed by the military force of NATO, to break the power of Russia, which stood in the way of global domination of a collapsing system. And so that's the connection between money and wars. We have no quarrel with the Russian people. If we had a decent president, we'd have no quarrel with Putin. The reason we have a quarrel is because we have corrupt, immoral bankers who are committed to protecting a system which is pillaging the earth and killing people to keep their worthless pieces of paper, their derivatives, their mortgage-backed securities liquid at a point in which more and more Americans can no longer put food on the table. So that's what the fight is about. And people should stop focusing on religion and personality and ask themselves a simple question. Is their life better or worse since 2008? Has anything been done since 2008 by either party to improve the economy? And if not, then why the hell do we tolerate these two parties controlled by the same group of bankers? And that's, to me, the long and short of it. You want to live in harmony and peace? There are proposals out there. LaRouche has a proposal for 4 laws for the United States, starting with Glass-Steagall, a credit system, investment in infrastructure, and the development of nuclear fusion power, which would make the United States once again the envy of the world. We could do that together with the BRICS nations. and probably Germany and others would join us. That's how you get out of war. You break the power of the bankers. But the one thing in common between the period of 1914 and 100 years later is that the bankers still dominate all the governments of the West. And as long as that happens, and by bankers I'm including insurance cartels, the pharmaceutical cartels and others, as long as that's the case, we're going to be on the edge of war, including possible thermonuclear war.
Well, that's why we have him on, you guys. It's Harley Schlanger, our good friend from LaRouche PAC. And World War III is what we're talking about because, this isn't fear-mongering. Everything we've talked about in this last 30 minutes is fact-based. This isn't hyperbole. It's not fear-mongering. It's reality. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping here. I just want to mention, guys, we do have a click-down tab on the left side of SGT Report. If you look for the words SGT Archives there, it's a red box with white letters. Click down where it says Select Category. And if you want to see the latest on Flight MH17, for instance, or you want to see the latest on Second Amendment issues or New World Order tyranny, if you've missed any of our interviews, there's a tab there for SGT interviews. Just click on whatever subject it is that you're interested in, and all of those articles are archived. Because we post so much information, you may feel like you're missing out day in, day out. You can always go and narrow down by the subject you're interested in, whether it's Fukushima, Flight MH17, fascism, false flags, eugenics and vaccines, economy, whatever it is you're interested in, whatever articles you need to research, it's all right there in SGT Archives. Harley, thanks so much for your time. Again, you're one of the voices that we look to try to make sense of all this madness.
Well, I try to make sense of it myself, and sometimes it's hard to remain an optimist. But if mankind has proven anything, it's that we often wait till the last minute, but there's always been a way out. That's how we've advanced. And we've had many, many detours into destruction and barbarism. And we could be in a dark age. I mean, we may already be in a dark age. But if you have any strength and any conscience and any commitment to the future, you have to fight. And I think that's why it's important, why I'm happy to talk with you, because I know your listeners, even though I see some of the cynical comments, Schlanger still hasn't learned that you can't beat these guys. These guys can be beaten. They're bankrupt. They're stupid. They're doing the same thing over and over again. It's that we give them a way out. We give them a free pass. And if your listeners drop their cynicism and actually take seriously the idea that human beings are here for a higher purpose than just consuming, then maybe we can win this fight.
Perfect. That's the way we will end it. Harley, thanks so much. Guys, our guest has been Harley Schlanger from LaRouche PAC. Is it LaRouchePAC.com, Harley?
Yeah, LaRouchePAC.com. Sean, let me just ask you if you would like to, I'd be happy for you to put my email address at the end of your post, because I last time I did that, I got a lot of responses, and I'm perfectly willing to respond to anybody who has questions or wants to discuss these issues further. You can reach me at Harley SCH, that's HarleySCH @gmail.com.
All right, Harley, thanks so much. Well, let's talk again in a couple months or whenever situation warrants it.
Okay, Sean.
Okay,
great.
Thank you. Guys, thanks for all your support at sgtreport.com, and please do check us out at thelibertymill.com as well. Real news, 24/7, designed to fight the New World Order. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.